I inherited a $90 million mansion from my parents, but my greedy mother-in-law had other plans. She demanded I sell it for her business. When I refused, she showed up with her son, tied up the security guard, and set my home ablaze. They thought they'd won, but the next morning, I hit them with a shocking revenge they could never have imagined. My name is Lena Harrison, and if you'd asked me a year ago where I saw my life going, I would have told you everything was perfect. I was 32, a successful event planner in Austin, Texas. I had a job I loved, friends I cherished, and a marriage I believed in. My parents, both self-made millionaires, had given me everything I needed to build a secure future. And when they passed away unexpectedly, I thought I could continue honoring their legacy while building my own life. When I inherited their estate, which included a $90 million luxury mansion, I felt like I was living in a dream. It was more than just a home. It was the product of their hard work and sacrifice, a symbol of their love for me. I could still feel their presence in every corner of that house. It was overwhelming, yes, but it was also an opportunity to truly begin a new chapter in my life. My husband, Dylan, and I had always talked about moving into a bigger home one day, but nothing could have prepared us for the reality of what was about to unfold. Dylan was 34, a real estate agent who was thrilled about the prospect of living in such a luxurious mansion. When we moved in, it felt like our lives were finally coming together. We spent days decorating the grand rooms and evenings strolling through the lush gardens, savoring the peace of our new life. For a while, it felt like nothing could disrupt our happiness. But it didn't take long for the first cracks to appear. Dylan's mother, Margaret, was a woman who'd never hidden her opinions. At 58, she had always been a constant presence in our lives, critical, demanding, and often overbearing. I thought I'd be able to manage her, but I couldn't have been more wrong. From the moment Margaret learned about the mansion, something in her shifted. Her words were kind at first, full of praise, but there was an undercurrent of something darker. She began to make remarks about how lucky I was and how the house would be wasted on one person. At first, I didn't think much of it, but soon, the comments became more direct. "Lena, you know," she said one afternoon as she casually visited, sipping tea, "I've always believed in good investments. With all that money, you could really expand your reach. Real estate is such a profitable business. I don't know why you're holding on to that mansion." I was taken aback. I had just lost both my parents, and this house was all I had left to remind me of them. It wasn't just about money, it was about honoring their memory. "I'm not ready to sell, Margaret," I said softly, trying to keep my voice steady. "This place means a lot to me." She raised an eyebrow, her lips curling into a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I get it, Lena. But you do realize that selling it and investing in something else would set you up for life, right? Think about it. Real estate, the right property, the right business. It could change everything." I could feel my stomach tighten, but I tried not to show it. "I'm not interested, Margaret. I'm happy here." But Margaret was persistent. Every time we spoke, the conversation veered back to the house. It was clear she didn't understand why I wouldn't simply sell it and use the money for something better. She grew more insistent, and that's when I started to feel the pressure. It wasn't just her anymore. Dylan, my husband, began to show signs of being influenced by his mother's ideas. He would sit quietly during our discussions, his silence growing louder with every passing day. I tried to brush it off at first, telling myself that it was just a phase. After all, Dylan had always been supportive. He had been my rock through all the struggles with my parents' passing. But as the days went on, I began to wonder if his loyalties were shifting. One day, Margaret and her younger son, Max, showed up at our door unannounced. I knew immediately something was wrong. Margaret's eyes were too bright, too focused, and Max, who was only 26, had an expression that mirrored his mother's, impatience and hidden anger. "What's going on?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. Margaret didn't even greet me. She walked straight into the living room and, without preamble, said, "Lena, I've had enough of this. The house is a waste. You need to sell it and use that money wisely. I'm tired of waiting for you to make the right decision." I was stunned. "Margaret, This house is not for sale. This isn't about the money, it's about keeping my parents' legacy alive. I won't just give it up because you think it's a waste. She smiled coldly, and for the first time, I saw something dark in her eyes. You think you're the only one who can benefit from this inheritance? You think your parents would want you to hoard it? No, Lena. It's time to let go. Before I could respond, Max stepped forward, looking at me with a coldness that sent a chill down my spine. Mom's right, he said. You're being stubborn. This could be a huge opportunity for all of us. Why hold on to something that just sits there, wasting away? I felt the walls closing in, the weight of their words crushing me. This isn't about money, I said again, my voice firm. I'm not selling. This house is mine, and it means something to me. Margaret's smile faltered for just a moment, but she quickly regained her composure. Fine, she said, her voice dripping with disdain. But don't think I'll forget this. And just like that, she and Max left, but I had a feeling in my gut that this wasn't the end. I didn't know it at the time, but I was about to learn the true depths of betrayal and the cost of standing my ground. What happened next would change everything. I wish I could say I was wrong about Margaret, that I overreacted. But what happened next confirmed all of my fears. I thought the worst was behind me, but in reality, it had only just begun. It was a regular afternoon, or at least I thought it was. Dylan and I were settling into our new life, still getting used to the mansion. I was upstairs working on some event plans, trying to keep busy. I didn't expect anything unusual, but then I heard a loud knock on the door. My heart skipped a beat. Margaret rarely came by unless she had something to say, and her tone the last time we spoke made it clear that she was not going to let this go. I answered the door, only to find Margaret standing there, her face flushed with anger. She didn't say hello.
She didn't ask how I was.
She simply stormed past me, her eyes locked on the mansion as if she was ready to tear it down with her gaze alone. What are you doing here, Margaret? I asked, my voice growing tense. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she called out to Max, who had been hiding behind the large columns of the porch. Max stepped forward, and that's when I knew something was wrong. They weren't just here to talk. Margaret, what is this about? I asked again, feeling a sense of dread growing in the pit of my stomach. Everything, Lena, she finally said, her voice hard. You've made a huge mistake by not listening to me. I gave you a chance, but now you're forcing my hand. Before I could ask what she meant, a loud sound came from behind me, followed by the unmistakable crackle of fire. I whipped around in shock and disbelief. Margaret and Max were standing there, a lighter in Max's hand, and the flames were starting to spread on the edge of the mansion's beautiful porch. My breath caught in my throat. What are you doing? I screamed. This is the only way, Lena, Margaret said coldly. You're not listening, so we'll make you. My heart pounded in my chest.
They were setting the house on fire.
Not just any fire, but an intentional one, meant to destroy everything that my parents had worked for, everything I had inherited. I couldn't breathe. I didn't know what to do. My thoughts were racing as I watched the flames begin to spread, looking at the edges of the mansion, hungry and fast. My first instinct was to call for help, but I had to do something more. Something to stop them from completely ruining everything. I turned quickly, my mind snapping into survival mode. The mansion had security cameras and a guard who was usually stationed at the front gate. I ran to the living room and grabbed my phone, my hands shaking as I started recording the scene. I knew I had to capture everything, especially since I could see Dylan standing in the background, his face a mask of indecision. As I panned the camera, I saw the security guard tied to a chair, his mouth gagged, unable to stop the arsonists. That was when the full weight of the betrayal hit me. My own husband, my partner, was standing there doing nothing. Dylan wasn't even trying to stop his mother or brother. He wasn't trying to protect the house. He was complicit. I could feel the tears threatening to spill, but I held them back. I wasn't going to let them see my weakness. I wasn't going to let them break me. In a flash, I made a decision. I ran to the back of the house and released my trained attack dogs. I knew they would be my only chance to force them to stop. The dogs were well trained to respond to threats, and I trusted them more than anyone else at that moment. As soon as Margaret and Max saw the dogs running toward them, their faces went pale with fear. Without a word, they both turned and bolted, running as fast as they could, leaving the fire to rage on in the background. It was surreal, almost as if it were all happening in slow motion. I heard the dogs barking loudly, chasing after them, but it was too late. The fire had already taken hold. I dialed 911, but by the time help arrived, it was already too late. Half of the mansion had been consumed by flames. I stood there, watching the destruction unfold, my mind spinning. I couldn't comprehend what was happening. This was no accident. It was a deliberate attempt to destroy everything that had been left to me. But the worst part was realizing that Dylan had been part of this. He had stood there, watching, doing nothing to stop his mother and brother. They had all betrayed me, my own family. The days that followed were a blur of chaos. The police arrived, and I was able to give them the evidence I had recorded. But Margaret, Max, and Dylan had already disappeared. They had gone underground, evading the authorities. I couldn't believe it. My own husband had chosen to stand with his mother and brother over me. I didn't know what to do. I felt lost, heartbroken, and angry. But I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to let them get away with it. Not after everything I had lost. I hired a lawyer, gathered all the evidence I had, and vowed to make them pay. I would get justice for my parents, for the mansion, and for myself. I wasn't going to let their greed and betrayal win. But little did I know, the worst was yet to come. The days after the fire felt like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. The mansion was destroyed, my life was in chaos, and the betrayal was too much to bear. But I wasn't going to let it end there. I had to do something. I had to fight back. I called a lawyer, Mr. Thomas Anderson, a calm and experienced man who specialized in property disputes and fraud. The moment I met him, I knew he was the right person to handle my case. He listened to my story with patience, and as I showed him the videos and photos of the fire, he nodded gravely. "We can use this evidence," he said after a long pause, "but we need to gather more. If they're trying to run from the law, we need to be quick." He was right. As much as I wanted to focus on the emotional side of things, I knew I needed to build a solid case. We compiled every piece of evidence, phone recordings, photos of the security guard tied up, and any traces of their involvement. I knew my husband Dylan's role in all of this was undeniable, but I wasn't sure where they had gone. Dylan, Margaret, and Max had vanished without a trace, and I couldn't shake the feeling that they were planning something else. Something worse. The police had been notified immediately after the fire, but they were having trouble locating any of them. It seemed like they had all gone underground. They were smart, too smart for me to catch alone. I couldn't help but feel helpless. My own family had betrayed me, and now they were hiding, slipping away without facing any consequences. I was restless. Every day, I checked the news and the police reports, hoping for a breakthrough. I even went to the mansion site once, looking at the burned remnants of my parents' home, the place where so many memories had been created. It was painful, but I couldn't allow myself to mourn just yet. There was something more important to focus on: revenge. No, not just revenge. Justice. 1 week later, the breakthrough finally came. I received a call from Mr. Anderson early in the morning. His voice was steady but urgent. "Lena, they've been found. Your husband, mother-in-law, and brother-in-law were arrested this morning at the airport. They were trying to leave the country," he said. For a moment, I felt the weight of the words hit me. I could hardly believe it. They had tried to escape, to flee from what they had done, but they couldn't get away. The police had tracked them down just in time, and now they were facing serious charges. I didn't know whether to feel relief or anger. But in that moment, I realized that this was my chance to make them pay for everything they had taken from me. They had destroyed my parents' legacy and betrayed me in the worst possible way. Now they had to face the consequences. The charges were severe: arson, conspiracy, and property destruction, among others. I could hardly stand to think of my husband's involvement in all of this. I had trusted him, and he had thrown it all away. But there was no time for self-pity. I had to focus on the court case ahead. The trial was intense. I testified about everything: how Margaret and Max had set the fire, how I had captured the evidence on my phone, how Dylan had stood by and let it all happen. They denied it at first, but the evidence was irrefutable. In the end, the court ruled in my favor. Dylan, Margaret, and Max were ordered to sell their properties and compensate me for the loss of the mansion. But their punishment didn't end there. The court handed down prison sentences, and they were forced to face the consequences of their greed and betrayal. It wasn't the end I had imagined, but it was justice. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of relief. They had been caught, and I had done what was right. But little did I know, this was just the beginning of my journey to reclaim my life. The aftermath of the trial was nothing like I imagined. I thought the verdict would give me closure, but instead, it left me with a bitter taste in my mouth. Justice had been served, but I couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal. Dylan, the man I had once loved and trusted, was now a stranger. My own family, my mother-in-law and brother-in-law, had turned on me, and the house, the beautiful mansion that had been my parents' legacy, was gone. It wasn't just bricks and mortar that I had lost, it was the symbol of everything they had worked for. But as the days passed, I began to realize something important. I had won. I had fought back. I had stood strong, even when the people I loved the most had tried to tear me down. I wasn't just the victim of their betrayal anymore, I was the woman who had survived it. I had reclaimed my life, my power, and my future. And now it was time to build something new. I used the compensation money from the court order to make a fresh start. I didn't need another mansion. I didn't need to replace what was lost. Instead, I invested in myself. I focused on my career as an event planner, something I had always loved but hadn't had the time for while my life was consumed by the drama of the inheritance. I hired a new team and worked on some of the most exciting events of my career, finding satisfaction in helping others create moments that would last a lifetime. But more than that, I poured my energy into healing. I surrounded myself with people who cared about me, friends who had supported me through the toughest parts of my journey. They reminded me of who I was before all the chaos, the strong, independent woman who had a passion for life. I reconnected with old friends and even made new ones, rediscovering parts of myself that had been buried beneath the weight of the betrayal. I didn't forget the pain. I couldn't. But I learned how to live with it. I took the lessons I had learned from my parents about resilience, about standing tall no matter what life threw at you, and I applied them to every area of my life. The mansion might have been destroyed, but I realized that it wasn't the house that made me who I was. It was my strength, my ability to rise from the ashes. One evening, as I sat on the balcony of my new apartment, modest yet peaceful, I looked out over the city skyline, the soft glow of the sunset painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. I felt a sense of calm wash over me, something I hadn't felt in a long time. I thought about everything I had lost and everything I had gained. The pain of losing my parents, the betrayal of my own family, the destruction of the mansion, it all seemed so distant now. I had emerged from it all stronger, more self-assured, and ready to face whatever came next. The people who had betrayed me, Dylan, Margaret, Max, they were gone from my life. They were paying the price for their greed and deceit. But I didn't feel the anger anymore. I felt a sense of freedom. I was no longer defined by the actions of others. I was in control of my own story, and I would write the next chapter on my own terms. I moved forward, not forgetting what had happened, but using it as fuel to create a life that was mine, one built on my own hard work, integrity, and resilience. I may have lost my parents' mansion, but I gained something far more valuable: my independence, my peace, and the knowledge that no matter how deep the betrayal, I had the power to rise above it. As the sun set that evening, I realized I was ready for whatever came next. I had survived the worst, and now I could embrace the future with open arms. No longer weighed down by the past, I felt lighter, freer, and more confident than ever. This was my new beginning, and I was ready to live it.
Lydia, how could Stephen do this to us? He's gambled away our savings. Esther's voice cracked with shock as she waved the bank statement in front of my face. I stared at the numbers, unable to comprehend the depth of my husband's betrayal. Our hard-earned retirement fund, the nest egg we'd carefully built over decades of sacrifice, had vanished into the abyss of his addiction. Esther's accusatory glare bore into me, as if I were somehow responsible for her son's reckless behavior. I swallowed hard, fighting back the tears that threatened to spill. I had no idea, I stammered, my hands trembling. He never told me anything. Esther scoffed, her lips curling into a sneer. Of course he didn't. You're too busy with your little hobbies to notice what's happening in your own home. Her words stung, but I knew better than to engage in her toxic games. Stephen had always been her golden child, capable of no wrong in her eyes. As if on cue, my husband shuffled into the kitchen, his eyes downcast and his shoulders slumped. He reeked of stale cigarettes and cheap whiskey, a far cry from the sharp-dressed professional he once was. "Mom, Lydia?" "I'm sorry," he mumbled, his voice barely audible. "I got in too deep and I couldn't stop." Esther rounded on him, her fury palpable. "You foolish boy, how could you do this to your family? Your wife and children deserve better than a deadbeat gambler." Stephen flinched, shrinking under his mother's wrath. I wanted to defend him, to remind Esther that he was a grown man, not the little boy she still saw him as, but the words died on my lips, choked by the weight of his betrayal. In that moment, I realized the true gravity of our situation. With our savings gone, we would be forced to rely on Esther's meager pension and my modest retirement income. The comfortable life we had built for ourselves was crumbling before our eyes. Esther turned to me, her eyes narrowed. "You'll have to take me in, Lydia. I can't afford to live on my own anymore." I opened my mouth to protest, but the words never came. What choice did I have? Stephen had squandered our financial security, and his mother was now our responsibility. As I nodded my reluctant agreement, I couldn't help but feel the invisible chains of obligation tightening around me. Our once peaceful suburban home was about to become a battleground, and I feared I was ill-equipped for the war that lay ahead. "Lydia, this food is awful. You never had any sense of taste," Esther complained, pushing the plate away with a look of disgust. I bit my tongue, fighting back the urge to defend my cooking. It was a losing battle, one I'd learned long ago not to engage in. Esther had always been critical, her sharp tongue a weapon she wielded with precision. Stephen, as usual, remained silent, his eyes fixed on his plate as he mechanically shoveled food into his mouth. He had long since given up trying to mediate the constant tension between his mother and me. Adam and Leah exchanged uncomfortable glances, caught in the crossfire of our dysfunctional family dynamic. I felt a pang of guilt, knowing that their childhood memories were tainted by scenes like this, played out over and over again. "Grandma, the food is delicious," Leah offered, her voice gentle but strained. "Mom worked hard on this meal," Esther scoffed, waving her hand dismissively. "You're too kind, dear. Your mother has never been much of a cook." Adam shifted in his seat, his brow furrowed. "Mom, maybe you should listen to Grandma's advice. She knows what she's talking about." I felt the familiar sting of his words, a reminder that even my own son had been swayed by Esther's manipulative ways. She had a knack for turning family members against one another, sowing seeds of doubt and discontent. As the meal dragged on, the tension in the air grew thicker, suffocating me with each passing minute. I longed for the days when our family gatherings had been filled with laughter and warmth, before Esther's presence had cast a dark shadow over our home. After what felt like an eternity, the dishes were cleared, and Esther retreated to her room, leaving a trail of criticism in her wake. Stephen, as always, followed dutifully, his loyalty to his mother unwavering. I sank onto the couch, exhausted by the constant battle to maintain a semblance of normalcy. Adam and Leah hovered nearby, their expressions a mix of pity and frustration. "Mom, you shouldn't let her get to you like that," Leah said softly, taking a seat beside me. "Grandma is just, well, you know how she is." I forced a smile, but it felt hollow. "I know, dear. It's just, sometimes it feels like she's slowly chipping away at me, piece by piece." Adam shook his head, his jaw set in a familiar stubborn line. "You're too sensitive, Mom. Grandma's just trying to help in her own way." I wanted to argue, to make him see the truth about Esther's manipulative behavior, but I knew it would be futile. He was too deeply entrenched in her web of lies and deceit. As I watched my children leave, each carrying their own burdens of family drama, I couldn't help but feel a sense of hopelessness. Esther's grip on our lives seemed unbreakable, and I feared that the fractures within our family would only continue to widen. "Mom, you've always been so stubborn. You should listen to Grandma," Adam lectured me coldly, his arms folded across his chest. I felt a familiar pang in my heart as my own son sided with Esther, his grandmother's poisonous words seeping into his mind like a slow-acting venom. It was a scene that had played out countless times, but the sting never dulled. Beside him, Rebecca nodded in agreement, her lips curved into a smug smile. She had quickly become Esther's ally, feeding into the toxic dynamic that had taken root in our home. "Adam, please," I pleaded, my voice strained. "Can't you see what she's doing? She's trying to turn us against each other." He scoffed, shaking his head dismissively. "You're just being paranoid, Mom. Grandma only wants what's best for us." I wanted to scream, to shake him until he saw the truth, but I knew it would be futile. Esther had sunk her claws into him long ago, and her grip was unrelenting. Stephen, as always, remained silent, his eyes downcast as he retreated to the shadows of our crumbling marriage. He had long since abdicated his role as a husband and father, content to let Esther dictate the course of our lives. Leah, my sweet, sensitive daughter, watched the exchange with a pained expression. She had always been caught in the crossfire, torn between her loyalty to her family and her desire for peace. "Mom, Dad, please," she implored, her voice trembling. "Can't we just get along? Tom and I are getting married soon, and I don't want this drama to overshadow our special day." I felt a surge of guilt, knowing that my daughter's happiness was being tainted by the toxic environment we had created. She deserved better, a loving family to support her as she embarked on this new chapter of her life. But Esther was having none of it. "Don't be ridiculous, Leah," she snapped. "Your mother is the one causing all the problems. If she would just listen to me, everything would be fine." I clenched my fists, biting back the retort that burned on my tongue. Esther thrived on conflict, reveling in the chaos she sowed within our family. As the argument escalated, I felt myself retreating inward, a protective shell forming around my battered heart. I had always prided myself on being a strong, capable woman, but Esther's relentless attacks had slowly chipped away at my confidence, leaving me doubting my worth as a wife and mother. In that moment, a seed of defiance took root within me. I couldn't continue living like this, trapped in a cycle of toxicity and abuse. Something had to change, and I knew it would have to start with me. As my family dispersed, each retreating to their respective corners, I made a silent vow. I would find a way to regain control of my life, to break free from Esther's suffocating grip. It was a daunting task, but I was determined to succeed, no matter the cost. "Lydia, why are you working? Are you up to something no good?" Rebecca asked, her voice dripping with false concern as she leaned against the kitchen counter. I fought back the urge to roll my eyes, knowing that any reaction would only fuel her twisted games. Esther's influence had seeped into her like a poisonous venom, turning my once pleasant daughter-in-law into a master of subtle manipulation. "I'm just trying to keep busy," I replied, forcing a tight smile. "It gets a little lonely around here during the day." Rebecca's lips curved into a sickly sweet smile, her eyes glinting with malice. "Well, we wouldn't want you getting into any trouble, would we? A woman your age, working with all those young people, who knows what kind of ideas they might put in your head." The implication hung heavy in the air, a thinly veiled accusation of infidelity. I felt my cheeks flush with anger, but I refused to take the bait. Esther and Rebecca thrived on conflict, and I was determined not to give them the satisfaction. "I appreciate your concern, Rebecca," I said evenly, "but I can assure you my intentions are pure. I'm simply trying to make the most of my retirement years." Her smile faltered for a moment, and I saw a flicker of frustration cross her features. She had expected me to lash out, to play into her twisted narrative, but I had learned to control my emotions, to deny her the drama she so desperately craved. As if on cue, Esther shuffled into the kitchen, her eyes narrowed with suspicion. "What's going on in here?" she demanded, her gaze darting between us. Rebecca quickly recovered, her mask of concern slipping back into place. "I was just asking Lydia about her new job," she said innocently. "I'm a little worried about her, that's all." Esther's lips curled into a sneer as she turned her attention to me. A job? At your age? What could you possibly need to work for? I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the onslaught. It's just a part-time position at the community center, I explained calmly. It gives me something to do during the day, and a little extra income never hurts. Esther scoffed, her eyes boring into me with contempt. Extra income? Don't be ridiculous. We both know Stephen's gambling has left us in a precarious financial situation. You're up to something, Lydia, and I intend to find out what it is. I opened my mouth to protest, but the words died on my lips. What was the point? Esther had already made up her mind, and no amount of reasoning would sway her. She was determined to paint me as the villain, the one responsible for the fractures that had torn our family apart. As Esther and Rebecca continued to whisper and speculate, their voices a constant buzz in my ear, I felt a familiar sense of isolation creep over me. Stephen, as always, was nowhere to be found, content to let his mother and wife wage their war of words without him. In that moment, I realized that the only person I could truly rely on was myself. If I wanted to preserve what little dignity I had left, I would have to find a way to rise above the toxicity that had engulfed our home. Leah's voice broke through my thoughts, a welcome reprieve from the chaos. Mom, can we talk for a minute? I nodded gratefully, eager to escape the suffocating atmosphere of the kitchen. As we retreated to the privacy of the living room, I felt a glimmer of hope. Perhaps, in my daughter's understanding and support, I would find the strength to weather this storm. I need to tell you something, Mom. Dad's been seeing another woman, Leah blurted out, her eyes brimming with tears. The words hit me like a physical blow, knocking the wind out of me. I stared at my daughter, unable to process what she had just revealed. Stephen, my husband of nearly 4 decades, had been unfaithful. Are you sure? I managed to choke out, my voice barely above a whisper. Leah nodded, her lips pressed into a tight line. Tom's friend saw them together at a restaurant last week. They were holding hands and acting like a couple. A wave of nausea washed over me as the reality of Stephen's betrayal sank in. All those nights he had claimed to be working late, all the excuses and lies, they had been a smokescreen to cover up his affair. Anger bubbled up inside me, a white-hot fury that threatened to consume me. How could he do this to our family? To me? After everything we had been through, after all the sacrifices I had made to keep our household afloat in the wake of his gambling addiction, this was how he repaid me. That bastard, I hissed, clenching my fists. I'll kill him. Leah's eyes widened, and she reached out to grasp my hand. Mom, please, don't do anything rash. We need to handle this carefully. I took a deep breath, trying to rein in my emotions. Leah was right, as much as it pained me to admit it. Confronting Stephen in a blind rage would only give him the upper hand, allowing him to play the victim as he so often did. You're right, I conceded, my voice steadier now. We need to be smart about this. Leah nodded, her expression grim. I'm so sorry, Mom. I know how much this must hurt. I forced a weak smile, touched by her concern. It's not your fault, sweetheart. Your father made his choices, and now he'll have to face the consequences. As Leah left to rejoin her fiancé, I felt a newfound sense of determination coursing through my veins. Stephen had crossed a line, and this time there would be no forgiveness, no second chances. He had shattered the fragile trust that had held our family together, and for that he would pay dearly. I paced the living room, my mind racing with possibilities. I could confront him, demand a divorce, and take him for every penny he had left. Or perhaps a more subtle approach was called for, a slow and methodical dismantling of his life until he was left with nothing but the ashes of his own making. As I mulled over my options, a familiar voice broke through my thoughts. Lydia, what's going on? You look like you've seen a ghost. I turned to find Esther regarding me with a mixture of curiosity and disdain. Of course, she would be the last to know about Stephen's indiscretions. Her precious son could do no wrong in her eyes. A wicked smile curved my lips as a plan began to take shape. If Esther wanted to remain blissfully ignorant of her son's failings, so be it. But she would soon learn that her blind loyalty had consequences, and I would be the one to deliver that harsh lesson. Nothing's wrong, Esther, I replied smoothly. In fact, everything is about to change for the better. I'm leaving you, Stephen. I refuse to live in this misery any longer, I declared, thrusting a packed suitcase into his hands. Stephen blinked at me, his expression a mixture of confusion and disbelief. What are you talking about, Lydia? Where are you going? Away from you, I spat, my voice trembling with barely contained rage. Away from this toxic household and your constant betrayal. Realization dawned on his face, and he had the decency to look ashamed, if only for a moment. Leah told you about the affair, didn't she? I nodded, my jaw clenched. How could you, Stephen? After everything we've been through, how could you do this to our family? He shrugged, his eyes cold and devoid of remorse. It just happened, Lydia. You know how things have been between us lately. I needed someone to make me feel alive again. I recoiled as if he had struck me, his callous words cutting deeper than any physical blow. In that moment, I saw him for what he truly was, a selfish, weak man who had sacrificed his integrity and our marriage on the altar of his own desires. You disgust me, I hissed, my hands balling into fists at my sides. Get out of my sight before I do something I'll regret. Stephen opened his mouth as if to protest, but the sound of footsteps in the hallway cut him off. Esther appeared, her eyes narrowed with suspicion. What's going on here? She demanded, her gaze flickering between us. Lydia, why are you packing Stephen's things? I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the inevitable confrontation. I'm leaving, Esther. Your precious son has been having an affair, and I won't stand for it any longer. Esther's eyes widened, and she turned to Stephen, her expression a mixture of disbelief and fury. Is this true? Have you been unfaithful to your wife? Stephen shifted uncomfortably, unable to meet his mother's piercing gaze. It's complicated, Mom. Things haven't been right between us for a long time. That's no excuse, Esther thundered, her face flushed with anger. How dare you bring such shame upon this family? I watched the exchange with a sense of grim satisfaction, reveling in the sight of Esther's world crumbling around her. For once, her beloved son was the target of her wrath, and I couldn't help but feel a twisted sense of vindication. As Esther continued to berate Stephen, her words laced with venom, I slipped out of the room, leaving them to their bitter recriminations. It was time for me to start anew, to forge a life free from the toxicity that had plagued me for far too long. With a newfound sense of purpose, I gathered what few belongings I needed and made my way to the front door. As I stepped outside, the warm evening air caressed my face, and I inhaled deeply, savoring the taste of freedom. In that moment, I knew that the road ahead would be far from easy. Esther and Stephen would undoubtedly try to claw their way back into my life, using every manipulation tactic at their disposal. But I was ready for them, my resolve hardened by years of enduring their cruelty. As I walked away from the house that had once been my home, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. The invisible chains that had bound me for so long had finally been broken, and I was free to chart my own course, unencumbered by the burdens of the past. Mom, Grandma can't handle it. She's asking for you, Adam's voice pleaded weakly over the phone. I couldn't help but smile at the irony of the situation. Esther, the woman who had made my life a living hell for so long, was now desperate for my help. The tables had truly turned. Is she now? I replied, keeping my tone even. And why should I come back to that toxic environment? There was a pause on the other end of the line, and I could almost picture Adam squirming uncomfortably. Look, Mom, I know things have been rough, but Grandma is really struggling without you. She can't keep up with the household chores, and Dad is useless. I felt a twinge of satisfaction at the thought of Esther's carefully constructed world crumbling around her. For years, she had lorded over our family, wielding her power like a weapon. Now, she was finally getting a taste of her own medicine. I'm sorry, Adam, but I can't just come running back at her beck and call, I said firmly. Your grandmother has made my life miserable for far too long. If she wants my help, she'll have to agree to my terms. Another pause, this one longer. I could sense Adam's hesitation, his loyalty to Esther, warring with his desperation for a solution. What kind of terms? He finally asked, his voice tinged with resignation. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the confrontation to come. First and foremost, Esther needs to acknowledge her behavior and apologize for the way she's treated me all these years. No more manipulation, no more cruelty. Adam scoffed, and I could picture the skeptical look on his face. You know Grandma, Mom. She'll never admit she was wrong. Then I guess she'll have to learn to fend for herself, I replied, my tone brooking no argument. I'm done being her punching bag. There was a long silence, and for a moment I thought Adam had hung up. But then, his voice crackled through the line once more. Okay, Mom, I'll talk to her and see what I can do, but I can't make any promises. That's all I ask, I said, feeling a sense of relief wash over me. The first step had been taken, the gauntlet thrown down. Now it was up to Esther to decide how far she was willing to go to regain my cooperation. As I ended the call, I couldn't help but feel a sense of pride in my newfound strength. For too long, I had allowed Esther to dictate the terms of my life, to strip me of my dignity and self-worth. But no more. This was my chance to reclaim what was rightfully mine. And I wasn't about to let it slip through my fingers. Over the next few days, I waited patiently for Adam's response, steeling myself for the inevitable backlash from Esther. She was a proud woman, and admitting her wrongdoing would be a bitter pill to swallow. But as the days turned into weeks and still no word came, I began to realize the true extent of Esther's stubbornness. She would rather suffer in her own misery than swallow her pride and seek my help. It was then that I knew my true revenge had begun. By refusing to play by Esther's rules, by denying her the control she so desperately craved, I was slowly but surely dismantling the very foundation of her power. And as Leah's bond with me grew stronger, her eyes opening to the truth of her grandmother's manipulations, I knew that my victory was all but assured. The tide had turned, and Esther's reign of terror was coming to an end, one painful step at a time. I've decided to live with Mom. She needs me, and I need her, Leah announced, her voice resolute as she began packing her belongings. I watched in stunned silence as my daughter methodically sorted through her things, separating the essentials from the clutter that had accumulated over the years. Her movements were purposeful, her expression one of steely determination. Are you sure about this, sweetheart? I asked, unable to keep the tremor of hope from my voice. Your grandmother won't make it easy for you. Leah paused, her gaze meeting mine with a newfound strength that took my breath away. I'm sure, Mom. After everything that's happened, I can't stay in that toxic environment any longer. It's time I stood up for myself, and for you. A lump formed in my throat as I pulled her into a fierce embrace, overwhelmed by a surge of pride and love. My daughter, once so conflicted and torn by the family drama, had finally found her voice, her inner strength. As we held each other, I couldn't help but think back to the dark days when Esther's grip on our lives had seemed unbreakable. Her manipulation had seeped into every corner of our existence, poisoning our relationships and robbing us of our dignity. But now the tide had turned. With Leah by my side, a united front against the forces that had sought to tear us apart, I felt a renewed sense of hope blossoming within me. Over the next few days, we settled into our new living arrangement, creating a sanctuary of peace and love in the midst of the chaos that had once consumed us. Leah's presence was a balm to my weary soul, a reminder that even in the darkest of times there was light to be found. And as we spent more time together, sharing our stories and supporting one another, I began to see the cracks forming in Esther's carefully constructed facade. Her hold on Adam, once so ironclad, was slowly but surely loosening. It started with small things, a missed phone call, a canceled dinner plan. But soon, the signs became more pronounced. Adam would show up at our door, his expression one of bewilderment and uncertainty, as if he were finally seeing the truth that had been hidden from him for so long. Mom, Grandma is different, he confided in me one evening, his brow furrowed in confusion. She's not the same person I thought she was. I nodded, understanding dawning in my heart. Esther's power had always been rooted in her ability to manipulate, to twist the truth to suit her own agenda. But with Leah and me standing firm, refusing to play her games, that power was slowly slipping away. As the weeks passed, the distance between Adam and his grandmother grew wider, a chasm of disillusionment that even Rebecca's subtle machinations couldn't bridge. And with each passing day, Stephen's life seemed to unravel further, his once proud demeanor crumbling under the weight of his own failures. It was a bittersweet victory, to be sure. Part of me still loved the man I had once pledged my life to, the father of my children. but his actions had set in motion a chain of events that had nearly destroyed us all, and for that there could be no forgiveness. As I watched Leah blossom in our newfound sanctuary, her smile radiant and her spirit soaring, I knew that I had made the right choice. Our family had been fractured, broken by the toxic influences that had wormed their way into our lives. But now we were on the path to healing, to reclaiming the love and respect that had once bound us together. And as for Esther and Stephen, their fate was sealed. They had sown the seeds of their own destruction, and now they would reap the bitter harvest of their actions. For in the end, love and truth would always triumph over manipulation and deceit. You always were the disappointment, Ethan. This house was never meant for you and your little family. Pack your things and leave by the weekend. We don't need you here anymore. Adrian's voice, sharp and condescending, cut through the air. I stood outside the dining room, clutching the doorframe. My breath caught in my throat. Ethan had been pacing, his frustration evident. I've put up with your arrogance and your endless criticisms for too long, Ethan shot back. We'll leave, but mark my words, you'll regret this decision. The moment hung heavy in the air as the argument simmered down. My heart ached for Ethan. He had always strived to keep the family together, to fulfill his father's wish, but Adrian's return had shattered the fragile peace we had managed to maintain. As I stepped into the room, Ethan turned toward me, his face a blend of anger and sorrow. Lila, we need to talk about what's next. Our life had turned upside down since we moved in. 3 months ago, Ethan's father, Harold, had called in a panic. His health was failing, and he needed support. Ethan, ever the dutiful son, agreed despite knowing how fraught the relationship with his mother and brother could be. Do you remember how reluctant you were, Ethan? I said softly, trying to offer some comfort. You weren't sure about moving in, but Harold needed us. You did the right thing. Ethan sighed. But at what cost, Lila? Adrian's back, and he's making our lives hell. Now we have to uproot our family again. We retreated to our bedroom, which Harold had kindly given us when we moved in. The worn walls and creaking floorboards had since become our little haven of sanity. Maybe this is our chance to find a place of our own, I suggested, sitting on the edge of the bed. Somewhere we can finally be at peace. Ethan nodded, though his worry was clear. We have to think about Logan, too. He's had enough upheaval already. He just started at a new school. Logan, our 17-year-old son, had been adapting well despite everything, but the constant tension in the house wasn't fair to him. We'll make it work, I said with conviction. We've been through worse. We can get through this, too. Dinner that night was tense. Fiona, our 82-year-old mother-in-law, was her usual stern self, but tried to make small talk. Harold, frail yet kind, only managed a few words, but his eyes spoke volumes of apology and understanding. Adrian sat smugly, as if he had already won. Lila, could you pass the mashed potatoes? Adrian's voice oozed mock politeness. I clenched the serving spoon, but handed it over. Ethan barely touched his food, his mind clearly elsewhere. Later, as we lay in bed, Ethan turned to me, determination in his eyes. We'll pack up tomorrow and start looking for a new place first thing. We deserve a life free from all this. I squeezed his hand. Despite the turmoil, I believed in our ability to move forward. We had each other. And that was enough. Morning dawned, and the house was eerily quiet, a stark contrast to the tension that had filled it the night before. Ethan and I started packing our things, prioritizing the essentials. Logan helped, his usual teenage grumbling absent. He knew the gravity of the situation. Do you think we'll find something soon? Logan asked, folding his clothes into a suitcase. We will, Logan, Ethan replied firmly. We'll find a place where we can be happy. This is just a bump in the road. As we boxed up the last of our belongings, Harold shuffled into the room, leaning heavily on his cane. Are you sure about this, Ethan? There's no other way, Dad, Ethan said, his voice softening. Adrian has made it clear we're not welcome here. Harold's eyes grew misty. Your mother? She favors Adrian, but I never wanted this. I'm sorry things turned out this way. I placed a hand on Harold's arm. We know, Harold, you've always been kind to us. By midday, Adrian had made his presence known, sauntering into the room with a smug look on his face. Need any help moving out faster? He sneered. Ethan straightened, his fists clenching. We're handling it, Adrian. Don't worry about us. Adrian laughed. Oh, I'm not worried. Just making sure you don't overstay your welcome. My jaw tightened, but I held my tongue. There was no point in engaging with him. By evening, Ethan's mother, Fiona, appeared in the doorway, her face a mask of indifference. "Dinner's ready," she said curtly. "You might as well eat before you go." The dining room felt colder than usual. Fiona and Adrian seemed to carry on as if nothing had happened, while Harold remained silent, his sadness palpable. We ate quickly, wanting to get the meal over with. "Mom, could you stop pretending everything is fine?" Logan suddenly spoke up, his frustration boiling over. "This isn't fair." Fiona glanced at him, her lips pursed. "Life isn't always fair, Logan. You'll understand when you're older." Ethan pushed his plate away and stood up. "Enough. We're done here. We'll be gone by morning." He turned to Harold. "Dad, take care. We'll keep in touch." Harold nodded sadly. "Take care, son." We finished packing in silence, the heaviness of the situation wrapping around us like a shroud. As night fell, we squeezed into Logan's small room, sleeping on mattresses on the floor. Ethan's voice broke the quiet. "Tomorrow, we'll find our new beginning. Remember, Lila, we're stronger together." I nodded in the dark, taking solace in his words. No matter what Adrian or Fiona threw our way, we would face it head on. Our family's bond was unbreakable, and that was more than enough. We arranged a moving van early the next morning and loaded our belongings with a mix of urgency and relief. Ethan arranged for a storage unit while we began our search for a new home. Logan, though visibly weary, kept his spirits high, cracking jokes to lighten the mood. Once we finished, we stood in the driveway, looking at the house one last time. Harold sat on the porch, watching us with a mournful expression. Fiona and Adrian were nowhere to be seen. "Take care of yourself, Dad," Ethan called out. Harold nodded, giving a small wave. "You too, son. Stay strong." We drove away, leaving behind the web of spite and manipulation. Within hours, we were checking out rental properties, hopeful that a fresh start was around the corner. Meanwhile, back at the house, Adrian began tightening his grip. He demanded the best meals, barking orders at Fiona and treating Harold like a nuisance. Fiona's earlier coldness towards us was now thawed by Adrian's escalating arrogance, and she grew weary of her once favored son. By the end of the day, Adrian's demands had only increased. "Why can't you keep up, Mom? Is it that hard to make a decent meal around here?" Fiona sighed, her patience wearing thin. "I'm doing my best, Adrian. Maybe you should help out instead of just criticizing." Adrian scoffed. "Help out? That's not my job, Mom. That's what you're here for." Harold, watching the growing tension, finally spoke up. "Adrian, this isn't right. We need to work together, not tear each other apart." Adrian shrugged off his father's words, continuing his tirade without a care in the world. Back in town, we found a modest house that seemed promising. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours. As we began to settle in, Ethan's phone rang. He frowned at the screen. "It's Mom." "Are you going to answer?" I asked, my curiosity piqued. He hesitated, then picked up. "Hello, Mom." Fiona's voice was shaky. "Ethan, I need your help." Adrian's, "Not what I imagined. He's too demanding." Ethan's expression hardened. "You made your choice, Mom. You pushed us out." "I know, Ethan, but Harold's health is getting worse, and I can't manage everything," she pleaded. Ethan looked at me, seeking my input. I shook my head, firm in my resolve. "We can't save everyone, Ethan, and we need to focus on us." He relayed the message to Fiona. "I'm sorry, Mom, but we can't come back. We have to think about our family now." Fiona's sigh was filled with regret. "I understand." As we ended the call, I hugged Ethan tightly. We did the right thing. They need to face the consequences of their actions. Ethan nodded, his eyes resolute. We have our own lives to rebuild. No more looking back. And with that, we began piecing together the fragments of our new life, basking in the freedom and opportunities ahead, all the while knowing that karma had its own way of setting things right. We settled into our new place quickly. It wasn't luxurious, but it was ours, and that was all that mattered. As we unpacked, the tension began to lift. Logan seemed happier, and Ethan's shoulders were slightly less hunched. Just as we started to feel at home, the doorbell rang. I opened the door to find Adrian standing there, his face twisted in a smug grin. "What do you want, Adrian?" I asked, barely keeping my composure. Adrian pushed past me into the living room. "I've come to see if you're settling in well. Wanted to check up on my little brother and his lovely family." Ethan came out from the kitchen, his eyes narrowing. "Get out, Adrian. You're not welcome here." Adrian raised an eyebrow. Is that any way to greet family? I just wanted to see how you're doing. We're doing fine, no thanks to you, Ethan snapped. You have no business being here. Adrian chuckled darkly. Oh, but I do. You see, Mom and Dad are struggling without your help. It's quite entertaining to watch. My blood boiled. How can you be so heartless? They're your parents. Adrian shrugged. They made their bed. Isn't that what you always say, Lila? Ethan stepped forward, his jaw clenched. You've said what you came to say, now leave. Adrian looked around, feigning disappointment. Such a pity. I was hoping for a cozy family reunion. But fine, I'll go for now. Remember, Ethan, you can run, but you can't hide from family responsibilities. With a final smirk, Adrian sauntered out, leaving a trail of tension in his wake. I turned to Ethan, my hands trembling. We can't let him get to us. We need to focus on us, remember? Ethan nodded, but the fire in his eyes was undeniable. He's not going to ruin this for us, Lila, I promise. Days turned into weeks, and we found our rhythm. Meanwhile, reports from Fiona trickled in. It seemed Adrian's return had only added to their troubles. Harold's health was worsening, and Fiona found herself overwhelmed by Adrian's increasing demands and lack of support. One evening, the phone rang again. This time it was Harold. Ethan's face softened as he answered. Dad, are you okay? Harold's voice was weak but determined. Ethan, I need to see you. Things are bad here. Adrian is unbearable. Your mother can't cope. Ethan's resolve wavered, but he looked at me and I shook my head. We can bring Dad here, but we're not going back, I said firmly. Ethan relayed the message. Dad, pack your things. You're coming to stay with us. Harold's relief was apparent. Thank you, son. I don't know how much longer I could have lasted there. Hanging up, Ethan sighed. It's the right thing to do, Lila. We'll make it work. I took his hand. We're stronger together. We'll get through this. The next few days were a whirlwind as we prepared to bring Harold to our home. Despite the challenges, we held on to the belief that, together, we could face anything, and that, in time, Adrian and Fiona would reap the consequences of their own actions. The day Harold moved in with us marked a significant shift. His presence brought a mix of relief and underlying tension. We rearranged the small living room to accommodate his needs, determined to make him as comfortable as possible. Thank you for taking me in, Harold said, settling into the recliner we had bought for him. Your family, Ethan replied. We look out for each other. As days passed, we fell into a routine. Harold's gentle demeanor contrasted sharply with Fiona's demanding nature and Adrian's arrogance, making it clear why Ethan felt so conflicted about leaving them behind. One evening, as we sat around the dinner table, Harold broke the silence. I never wanted it to come to this. Adrian's behavior, it's inexcusable. Fiona, well, she's always had a blind spot for him. Ethan's face hardened. Dad, we all make choices. I just wish Mom had seen the truth sooner. Harold nodded, sorrow etched on his features. I hope she realizes it soon. Adrian's already caused too much damage. The phone rang, cutting through the moment. I answered, my stomach nodding at the sound of Fiona's voice. Lila, it's Fiona. I need to talk to Ethan. I handed the phone over, mouthing, it's his mom, to Ethan. He took it, leaning against the counter. Mom? What is it? Fiona's voice was strained. Ethan, I need your help. Adrian's behavior is out of control. He's draining our finances and refuses to help with anything. I don't know what to do. Ethan took a deep breath. Mom, we've heard about Adrian's actions, but you chose to support him over us. We can't keep fixing your mistakes. But Ethan, I'm desperate, Fiona pleaded. Harold's not there, and I can't manage alone. Ethan's face was set in stone. We're taking care of Dad because it's the right thing to do. But we can't rescue you from the choices you made. You need to figure this out. Tears welled in Fiona's voice. Please, Ethan, I can't do this alone. Ethan's resolve showed no cracks. You have Adrian, Mom. He's your son, too. He hung up, exhaling deeply. We have our own lives to lead, Lila. We can't keep getting drawn back. The next morning, as Harold and I sat on the porch, he looked at me with a sad smile. You've given me a second chance at peace, Lila. No matter what Fiona says or does, you've done more than enough. I squeezed his hand. We're just glad you're here with us. Later, Ethan took Logan out for some father-son time, while Harold and I enjoyed the quiet. The weight of the situation still lingered, but amidst it all there was a sense of newfound hope and determination. As the sun set, Casting a warm glow over our small newfound sanctuary, we felt a glimmer of the future, one free from the past's relentless grip. In those quiet moments, we knew that, despite the chaos behind us, we were forging a path forward stronger than ever before. Life in our new home settled into a calm, manageable routine. Harold's presence was a constant reminder of the past, yet also a testament to the strength of our family. He found peace in the simple joys, afternoon walks with Logan, quiet meals together, and watching old westerns in the evenings. One afternoon, while I was preparing dinner, the phone rang. I answered, recognizing Fiona's strained voice on the other end. "Lila, I need to speak with Ethan. It's important." I handed the phone to Ethan, who took it with a look of resignation. "Mom, what is it now?" Fiona's voice wavered. "Ethan, Adrian's situation has gotten worse. His scandals hit the news, and he's lost his job. He's threatening to leave, and we're on the brink of losing the house. I don't know who else to turn to." Ethan's face was unreadable. "Mom, we warned you about Adrian, but you chose to ignore us. Now you want us to clean up his mess again?" "There's no one else, Ethan. Please, we need help." Fiona's voice cracked. Ethan took a long, deep breath. "We'll think about what we can do, but don't expect everything to go back to the way it was." He hung up and sat down heavily, looking at me. "Adrian's finally facing the consequences of his actions. Fiona wants our help, but I'm not sure what we can or should do." I placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "We've done our best to help. We need to protect our family now." As the days passed, Fiona's calls became more desperate. Adrian's downfall was public, and his wife had left him, taking what little they had left. The once confident brother now found himself at the mercy of the same parents he'd so easily disregarded when things were good. One evening, while Logan was out with friends, we gathered in the living room. Ethan broke the silence. "I've decided we'll help Dad move in with us permanently. We can't do more than that." Harold nodded, looking relieved. "I never wanted to be a burden. I just want peace in my last years." The next morning, Fiona called again, her voice heavy with resignation. "Ethan, I know I've made mistakes and I've favored Adrian unfairly, but please, understand, we're desperate." Ethan was firm yet kind. "I'm sorry, Mom, but Dad's welcome here. As for you and Adrian, you need to find your own way. We can't save you from the choices you made." Fiona's sobs echoed through the phone. "I understand. Thank you, Ethan." She hung up, leaving a weight in the air. As we helped Harold settle further into our home, the reality of our decisions sunk in. We had chosen the path that protected our family, though it left Fiona and Adrian to contend with their actions alone. In the end, we found solace in knowing we had done right by those who deserved it, and that, sometimes, life's harshest lessons had to be learned the hard way. Our newfound peace, earned through hardship, was the beginning of a brighter, more hopeful future. The air was crisp as we prepared breakfast that Sunday morning. I could sense a shift in Harold's demeanor. He seemed more content, more at peace. The house, now marked by quiet resilience, felt like a safe haven. As we gathered around the table, Ethan's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, then looked up at us. "It's Fiona again." "Should I answer?" I nodded. "It's better to know what's happening," Ethan answered, his voice careful. "Hi, Mom." Fiona sounded tired and defeated. "Ethan, I understand your decision. I just wanted you to know that Adrian left. He took what he could and disappeared. We're losing the house." Ethan was silent for a moment. "I'm sorry, Mom. I hope you find a way to get through this. Maybe reach out for some external help." Fiona sighed. "I'm trying, Ethan. I'm trying to make sense of everything." After the call, we ate in silence. Harold finally broke it. "You did what you had to do, son. Don't ever doubt that." Ethan nodded. "I know, Dad. It's just complicated." Later that day, as Ethan and I sat in the living room, Logan came home from playing basketball. He threw his bag down and flopped onto the couch. "Dad, are Grandma and Uncle Adrian okay?" Ethan hesitated. "They're going through a tough time, Logan, but we've done all that we can." Logan nodded, his young face already showing signs of understanding life's complexities. "I hope they figure things out. But I'm glad Grandpa is with us." Days turned into weeks, and our lives settled into a peaceful rhythm. One evening, an unexpected visitor knocked on our door. Ethan opened it to find a disheveled Adrian standing there. "What do you want, Adrian?" Ethan's voice was cold, filled with the history of betrayal. Adrian looked desperate. "I need a place to stay, Ethan. Everything fell apart. I have nowhere else to go." Ethan's jaw tightened. You put yourself in that position. We won't let you bring your chaos here. Adrian's eyes darted around, looking for a way in. Please, Ethan. I've lost everything. I'm your brother. No, Adrian, Ethan replied firmly. You are reaping what you sowed. Leave. Adrian lingered, but the door was shut firmly in his face. Inside, Harold nodded approvingly. Sometimes, tough love is the only way. As we settled into a movie that evening, the weight of our decisions felt lighter. The consequences of Adrian's actions were his to bear alone. In the coming months, we experienced a sense of peace and stability that had long eluded us. Logan excelled in school, and I found joy in a part-time job at the local community center. One evening, as Logan prepared for a college visit, Harold looked around the dinner table and smiled. It's good to see everyone thriving. Ethan squeezed my hand under the table. We've come a long way and learned a lot. We're stronger than ever. We raised our glasses in a silent toast to the journey we had endured and to the bright, uncharted path that lay ahead. Though the scars of the past remained, they were overshadowed by the love and unity that now defined our family. The bright sun heralded a new beginning as we prepared Harold for Logan's college visit. Our excitement was palpable. Logan was thriving, and his acceptance into a prestigious college added joy to our lives. Ready for the trip, Dad? Ethan asked, helping Harold into the car. Harold smiled, his eyes twinkling. I wouldn't miss this for the world. The drive was filled with laughter and anticipation. Logan talked about his plans, and we shared our hopes for his future. As we approached the campus, Ethan's phone buzzed. He glanced at it and frowned. It's Mom again. Do you want to answer? I asked gently. Ethan's brows knitted together. I'll call her back later. Today is about Logan. We parked and began our tour of the beautiful campus. Logan's eyes sparkled with excitement, and Harold's enthusiasm was infectious. Watching Logan navigate through the possibilities reminded us why we had made the tough choices we did. By evening, we had checked into a cozy bed and breakfast. After a hearty dinner, as we settled into our rooms, Ethan finally returned Fiona's call. Ethan, thank you for calling back, Fiona's voice cracked, filled with exhaustion. Adrian, he's hit rock bottom. He's lost everything and has been arrested for fraud. I don't know what to do. Ethan took a deep breath. Mom, you need to reach out to the proper authorities and get some help. We've done everything we can. It's up to you and Adrian now. Fiona sobbed quietly. I understand. I just wish I'd seen things sooner. I'm so sorry, Ethan. Ethan clenched his jaw, then softened. It's in the past now. Focus on making things right. We can't fix this for you, but I hope you find the strength to move forward. After he hung up, Ethan sighed deeply. It's never easy, is it? I placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. No, but we're making the right decisions for our family. The next morning, we continued our tour. By lunchtime, Logan had already made a few friends and explored enough to feel confident in his choice. Harold beamed with pride, and Ethan looked more relaxed than he had in months. As we prepared to head back home, Harold spoke up. This visit, it's a reminder of what we've accomplished as a family. Logan's future is bright, and we've built something strong and enduring. I nodded, tears welling up. We've gone through so much, but it's brought us closer together. Ethan squeezed my hand. We'll keep moving forward. Together. The drive home was quieter, filled with reflections and hopes for the future. As we pulled into the driveway, it felt like returning to a sanctuary, a place we had fought for and earned. We helped Harold inside and settled back into our routine. The weight of the past had lifted, replaced by a sense of peace and anticipation for the future. That evening, we gathered around the dinner table once more. To new beginnings, Ethan said, raising his glass. To new beginnings, we echoed, clinking our glasses together. As the sun set, casting a warm glow over our home, I looked around at my family, feeling a profound sense of gratitude. We had faced the storm and emerged stronger, ready for whatever lay ahead.
As the head of the household, my commands are non-negotiable. Should you choose not to heed my instructions, divorce will be our only option, regardless of his ongoing affair. Despite his attempts to control me, I questioned why I must adhere to everything he dictates. Fine, let's get a divorce then, I declared. Subsequently, I transferred all loans into his name, hoping he would recognize the extent of my contribution to our life together. My name is Carol, I'm 36 years old, and I work as a system engineer. It has been 6 years since I married my husband, John. We met through our jobs when my company, where I was an engineer, subcontracted work to his company. During a temporary assignment at his company, he approached me with kindness, leading us to gradually get to know each other outside of work. After a period of dating, he proposed and I accepted. Upon marriage, I left my job at the company. Being an engineer was demanding, often leaving me overworked, both physically and mentally, and the pay was insufficient. Concerned about not having enough time to spend with my husband and the potential strain on our relationship, I decided to become a freelancer. This decision allowed me more time for household chores and to spend with my husband. Initially, my income as a freelancer wasn't substantial, but thanks to my engineering experience, I eventually attracted more clients and started earning more. I was astonished at how quickly my income grew and was thankful for my husband's financial support during the times I earned less. I diligently performed household chores and experimented with various recipes to make my husband happy, for which he expressed gratitude, enhancing my happiness. In the early days, we respected each other and shared a happy life. However, a few years in, my husband proposed buying a new house, a suggestion that surprised me given his usual disregard for savings. I suggested saving more money, but he dismissed the idea, believing his income sufficient, unaware that our comfortable lifestyle was sustained by my increased earnings. Despite his belief that we hadn't faced financial difficulties since our marriage, it was my income that had bolstered our household budget, a fact I kept from him to protect his self-esteem. As our lifestyle remained unchanged, I surmised that my income must have significantly increased, a concept he seemed not to grasp fully. I couldn't believe what my husband said. However, he seemed enthusiastic about building a new home, and I had no way of stopping him. "What kind of house do you have in mind?" I had to find a way to build a low-cost home while accommodating my husband's increasing demands. But fulfilling all these conditions would significantly raise the cost. Isn't it a big deal? It's a once-in-a-lifetime purchase, and my income should be enough, right? I pondered the basis of his confidence. At that moment, I regretted not informing my husband about my income increase. I thought revealing it might calm him. "John, it's about household expenses, but actually, I'd also contribute a significant amount from my income." For some reason, he didn't believe me. "Don't lag like that," he dismissed. "No, I'm not lying." I wished for him to consider a more affordable house, but he refused to listen and took out a loan for a house he could barely afford with his salary. Initially, I thought we managed our finances reasonably, but over the years, my husband's spending became more reckless. He indulged in luxuries like brand-name clothes and watches, and he went out drinking nightly with his juniors, although he worked overtime to compensate. These spending habits became increasingly hard to ignore. Despite all this, he was determined to build a house, and eventually he made it happen. "Wow, this is a really nice house." A house is a clear sign of success, isn't it? He was right. The new house was awesome, spacious, beautiful, and comfortable. My workroom expanded, allowing space for a large desk and more comfortable work conditions, enhancing my productivity. However, the monthly mortgage payments still caused me anxiety. My husband seemed oblivious to the fact that we were paying off a long-term loan every month. The house in his name and his habit of overspending meant his account was always empty. Consequently, I had to transfer my income into his account to cover the mortgage. Frustrated, I decided it was time to address his spending. "Don't you think you've been spending too much lately?" "I want you to consider things like the mortgage for the house," I said. Upon hearing this, my husband frowned and rebutted me. "What are you talking about? How do we manage to live a normal life even after purchasing the house? If that's the case, then there's no issue. You're overly concerned with minor details. Or is it that you're just bad at managing money, and that's why you think we don't have enough? That's not my problem." "Wait a minute," I interjected. "I'm constantly figuring out how to save money for our daily living expenses with the money you provide, and I supplement it with my earnings for the mortgage and other bills. So please, don't speak to me in that manner." "What's gotten into you, really? Besides, the amount you contribute isn't all that much, so don't act as if you're doing something grand. The one who earns the most is the most important, which makes me the most important. Don't bother sharing your opinions," my husband declared, aiming to silence me. I was taken aback by my husband's change in attitude. He used to be kind and considerate when we first got married. However, since then, our relationship has become strained. We barely talk, and sometimes we don't even greet each other. My husband had started working overtime more than before and often returned home late at night. I pondered whether it was feasible to continue our married life like this, living under the same roof without real communication. Perhaps it might be better to consider a divorce, though I wished for reconciliation. After much thought, I decided to take the initiative to reach out to him. However, my resolve was immediately crushed when, on a weekday trip to town to buy a birthday present for a friend, I spotted him. He wasn't at work as expected, but was in town, dressed casually and walking with a young woman I didn't recognize. I couldn't believe it, but instantly suspected an affair. To uncover the truth, I hired a private investigator. 3 weeks later, I received the investigation results and visited the detective agency. My husband was indeed having an affair with a work colleague, and their relationship had been ongoing for about 2 years. I realized why my husband had suddenly begun spending extravagantly and coming home late under the guise of overtime 2 years ago. It was all because of his affair. Anger surged within me, especially after enduring his verbal abuses. He was the one having an affair, yet I felt pathetic for trying to protect his self-esteem and our marriage. I decided to cast aside all my doubts and act immediately. When I rushed back home, my husband was lounging on the sofa, engrossed in a sports program. I stood between the TV and him, spreading out the evidence of his affair right in front of him. "Explain this," I demanded as I presented him with the photo evidence. He seemed surprised for a moment, but quickly changed his attitude. "Oh, that's Sandra. She's my new wife." "New wife? What are you talking about?" "Well, now that you know, there's no point in hiding it. Unfortunately, you're no longer needed." "What are you saying?" "Frankly, I no longer have any use for you in my life. But Sandra doesn't want to do household chores, so you can stay and do the housework for her." "What? I would never do something like that." "Are you crazy? I would never do something like that." When I said that, my husband's face turned red with anger. "I'm the breadwinner in this household, so my orders are absolute. If you can't listen to me, then it's divorce." Despite having an affair, my husband was still trying to control me. "Why do I have to listen to him?" "Fine, let's get a divorce." "Huh? First of all, you had an affair, so we can't continue our marriage like this. Let's just get a divorce already." My husband was taken aback, but soon agreed with me. "Oh, all right. Don't come crying to me later. But you have to help me with changing the names on the utility bills and the car loans we just booked." Soon, I changed all the loans into my husband's name and divorced him. He probably thought it was over, but for me, it was just the beginning. You should realize how much I supported your life. The day after the divorce was finalized, I was already relaxing in my new apartment. Then I received a bunch of calls from my ex-husband. Since he had not yet paid me any compensation, I had not blocked his number. When I answered, he sounded flustered and said he needed to talk. I reluctantly agreed to meet him at a cafe, but he brought his mistress with him. "Well, you two look great together. What's going on? Why didn't you tell me every month a large amount of money is being deducted for loans? And why are the food expenses, car loans, utilities, and everything else so high? What are you trying to do by pushing all of that onto me, huh? I divorced you and left that house, so that's only natural. I don't have any other intentions. Shut up, this is fraud. I'll sue you." My ex-husband and his mistress glared at me while holding each other's arms. They both said it was my fault, but I couldn't give in to such ridiculous accusations. "It's your fault for not understanding the situation properly. I showed you various documents, didn't I? And since the loan for the house was originally in your name, it's only natural that you should pay for it. Until now, I've been putting the necessary money into your account. How can you, with just a small income, be putting that much money?" As an ex-husband with poorer comprehension skills. I explained everything to him. I was earning money as a freelance engineer, and currently, my annual income is around $200,000. "What do you say? Is that true?" Upon learning that I was earning much more than him, my ex-husband was surprised. "But whether you know it or not, it doesn't matter anymore. More importantly, since I haven't properly claimed compensation yet, I will do so through a lawyer." "Are you trying to swindle money from us?" "I'm just using my rightful claim. I will also make claims against your mistress." And that's exactly what I did. I received compensation from both of them for the emotional distress they caused me. By the way, the woman my ex-husband had an affair with was devastated to learn that he wasn't using his own money to pay for the loan. The next day, she disappeared from his life. Their affair was just like any other, and it ended when the money ran out. My ex-husband now lives a lonely life, struggling to pay off his loan and make ends meet while commuting between work and home. He deserves the punishment he got, but apparently he couldn't accept it and spread the news of his affair around the office. His mistress claimed that he was abusing her, and they ended up in a messy quarrel. However, since they both lost their credibility, no one believed either of them. It seems that my ex-husband's financial troubles only worsened, and he eventually got demoted and received a pay cut due to his inability to focus on his work because of his mounting debts. It's all his own fault, and frankly, he deserves it. On the other hand, I was nervous when I first moved into my new high-rise apartment, but now I'm able to relax and enjoy my life here. I may not be interested in marriage or romance for a while, but that doesn't mean I want to be alone forever. If I meet someone in the future, I hope we can build a mutually supportive relationship based on what I've learned from this experience. For now, I'll focus on working hard and making the most of my time for myself.